You're listening to China Africa Talk.
Jambo, ni Bridget akikuletea kipindi kinachohusiana na China na Afrika.
Vous écoutez le dialogue sino-africain avec Bridget.
Everything China, everything Africa.
Olá, você está ouvindo China Africa Talk com Bridget.
سيداتي وسادتي مرحبا بكم في الحوار الصيني العربي مع بريدجيت.
Multilateral institutions are under strain. Rivalries between major powers, unilateral actions, and crises like climate change, inequality, and conflict are testing the system that has shaped global order since World War II. China has put forward a response. The Global Governance Initiative, or GGI, announced by President Xi Jinping at the recent SCO Plus summit in Tianjin. The proposal calls for a system built on sovereign equality, adherence to international law, genuine multilateralism, and a people-centered approach that delivers real results. It also connects to China's earlier initiatives on development, security, and civilization, with a stronger emphasis on reforming how global institutions work. So, what's the significance of the GGI? What does this initiative mean for the Global South? To discuss this, I'm now joined by Paul Frimpong, Executive Director of the Africa-China Center for Policy and Advisory, and Liu Baocheng, Director of the Center for International Business Ethics at the University of International Business and Economics. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.
I'll begin with you, Professor Liu. President Xi Jinping recently unveiled the Global Governance Initiative, GGI, at the SCO Plus meeting in Tianjin. Could you briefly explain what this initiative is about and how you understand its key message?
Well, China has grown this fast in its economic might and also in its political influence. Therefore, it is the right time to propose a framework that is there to settle some of the confusions and turbulences with new initiative that is going on in the world. So, in a nutshell, the GGI, or Global Governance Initiative, is China's new and broad proposal for reforming and improving global governance. This is raised by President Xi during the Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting in Tianjin, which is there to frame the governance as a push for a more just, equitable, and effective international order that is built on, number one, sovereign equality. However small, however developed they are, they must be placed on equal basis. And then there must be a strong adherence to international order, international law that is already set forth. And three, is there to embrace real multilateralism in opposition to unilateralism. And then he also emphasized on people-centered policies, where all policies, all international relations should be settled based on how people would welcome it, how people would be able to benefit from such sort of policies. And number five, it is really an emphasis on concrete cooperation among nations rather than staying on the surface of rhetorics. So the official concept paper that is there to follow explicitly presents the GGI as a complementary to earlier Chinese framework, that is the Global Development Initiative, Global Security Initiative, and also Global Civilization Initiative, as a call to make some corrections over the perceived deficit that is going on in the representation, effectiveness, and fairness in the existing institutions.
Now, Mr. Frimpong, you based in Ghana, I'd like to know from an African perspective, what are your takeaways from this initiative?
Yes, as Professor mentioned, obviously in recent years, we've seen China taking the lead in proposing alternative ways of looking at the way the world runs, especially where China paved the way for more voices from especially countries from the global south. And this way, Africa playing a key part of the global south bloc. And again, in that line, obviously, in most of the time, these initiatives, as announced by China, aligns with Africans' own development aspiration and journey, especially in the kind of role that Africa seeks to play or Africa should be playing in the global, arena.
Right.
So the GI, the global governance, is very significant because, again, it places development, equity, inclusivity at the center of global governance. From African perspective, this really resonates deeply, and Africa, again, as I said, have long advocated for fair representation in global institutions and a governance model that prioritizes development rather than geopolitics. And as we've seen in the key principles in the GDI as announced by President Xi, it talks about multilateralism and South-South cooperation, which of course offers an African opportunity to shape or co-shape rules and of course access to resource for sustainable development and ensure that our voices are heard in reforming global governance because it cannot be business as usual. It cannot be like what we are seeing now. In fact, we're witnessing an opposite direction in what the world has been trying to achieve
Right.
for almost a century. So, for almost a century, the world has been working towards multilateralism, has been working towards globalization, has been working towards reforming international systems, spending huge fortunes to build a system that is more multilateral in nature, that allows different voices to come at play. But what we've seen in recent years is the reverse of this same commitment that the world has been poured into for almost a century. We are seeing the reverse of it, where we are now seeing anti-multilateralism approaches and policies from various governments, where we are seeing countries that were at first at the forefront of globalization and multilateralism are now withdrawing and even sabotaging the existing institutions that we have that even as a time even need more reform. And look at that kind of play. Obviously, we need to revive, we need to remind ourselves of why these commitments earlier on were very important. And I believe China is trying to do. And that is why we are seeing in recent times, almost every 2 3 years, we see China reminding the world that we still need to work on this path. We first need to understand and appreciate people's history, where they are coming from. That way we can appreciate why they are doing what they are doing now. Africa has our own civilization history. We need to respect that, irrespective of where you find yourself, whether developed or less developed. You still need to appreciate the African civilization journey. We need to ensure that security is paramount, because insecurity anywhere is a threat to security everywhere. So obviously these ideas, these initiatives from China and the principles that are enshrined in them speak to the core of what Africa has been doing. In fact, when you look at our own Pan-Africanism journey, since the colonial era, since the formation of the OAU, the Organization of African Union, to the now AU, the mandate, what we've been calling for. So obviously, all this aligns with all these initiatives that we are seeing being announced from China. So for us as an African, from an African perspective, this is a very good initiative to rally behind to ensure that countries in the global south, of course, this is Africa, can have a voice at the global stage.
You've just also highlighted a bit of what is going on in the world, which also leads me to my next question there. Looking more broadly, how would you describe the current state of the world? Which developments or challenges stand out most when we talk about global governance and international order?
I mean, if you look at my concluding remarks, as I didn't mention, we spent decades, almost centuries, to build a system, and now we are in the era of policy crisis. That's where we find ourselves. That's the word I can use to describe what we are in now. Policy crisis, right? Climate change, food security, public health threats, digital divide, geopolitical fragmentation, where we've seen a system largely built after World War II struggled to respond effectively. I mean, if you look at what happened in COVID-19, we witnessed inequality in even distribution of vaccine. Climate finance, now it's a big issue. Climate finance is a big issue. The shortfalls, the imbalances of power and resources. At the same time, we have the rise of multipolarity, the global south asserting itself. This is both a challenge and an opportunity for reshaping global governance. So this mixture is what I see in the world today in terms of what I call the poly crisis, a crisis in policies in and around us. And then again, on that side, as I said, we have the global south also aiming to assert its voice. Then you're going to see the clashes of the global south asserting its voice to the global north trying to maintain the status quo. And that kind of creates an arena of entanglement, an arena of debate on how the world should run. But I believe in all of this, there are opportunities, there are challenges. We just have to find a way to maintain the momentum that indeed we want to build a world that is inclusive, that is sustainable for everyone.
All right. I'd like to hear your thoughts there, Professor Liu. Looking more broadly, how would you describe the current state of the world? Which developments or challenges stand out most when we talk about global governance and international order?
Yes, fundamentally, it is the lack of confidence and lack of trust that hence leads to a very fragile sense of security.
Right.
So the lack of confidence leads to a lack of trust building and the incentive to build trust among nations. And many of the governments are also lack of trust in their own citizens and hence equally their citizens. So therefore, it is there to urgently look at some of the imperative issues. One is the war that is going on. You are talking about how we can save a bottle, how we can save a match, but with a bomb throwing onto the Mother Earth, not to mention the casualty they cause and the property destroyed. So the climate change is experiencing the biggest destruction. So therefore, how can we strengthen the governance based on trust building to stop the wars? Because these wars are really driven by a myopic type of approach. So this is really the core issue. But practically speaking, we are experiencing more of the geopolitical fragmentation and strategic rivalries among those great powers. And none of them want to lag behind, but there is no constructive solution to such a sort of competition. And then the lack of trust in the international institutions. So multilateral bodies like the WTO, like the World Bank and IMF, they are seen by many countries as insufficiently representative, and particularly among the developing countries in Africa and even in China. And now even the United Nations are losing voice. So they towards so many of those confrontations and so many unequitable type of global order. And then the public goods are experiencing crisis. And it is really a shame that we are entering into the 21st century and there is so high level of productivity. And now there are still the millions of people who are suffering from the malnutrition, while so many rich tycoons are enjoying their life in such a lavish manner. And I think another one is now when AI is coming to town, how to prevent its negative impact, because it is no longer something very tangible. If it's not really well managed or governed, it's going to be a virus in people's mind. So far, we have not really arrived on ethical integrity in managing new developments. So therefore, the world do need to discuss about initiative of the governance, but based on which there should be a standardized norms based on the basic human rights and basic the UN principles. And then there is also a sense of urgency how we can really move forward for the sustainable goals set forth by the United Nations. Those rich countries, powerful countries, they need to really deliver their responsibility already committed in terms of climate change issue, in terms of the poverty alleviation issues towards those underdeveloped countries. Right. But right now, it seems now they are hiding in a cocoon and talking about their own security. So this is really an irony. And, this is a really shame for humanity.
Still holding on to you there, Professor Liu, in light of today's turbulent global environment, do you think this was the right moment to propose such an initiative? Why now?
Well, I think, this should be delivered a long time ago and but of course, it's never too late for big countries to raise the voice for a more equitable and more just and more transparent world that is based on the rules to set up the global order. And so what really provoked it in production of GGI is that China has seen a whole series of recent shocks, from trade frictions to sanctions to wars to supply chain disruption to the shocks in the energy and food supply, continuing the climate stresses. So this really has increased the appetite, particularly in the global south, for new ideas and for new way of dealing with the global stability, and also to look forward for a global collaboration on an equal basis to deliver the right type of finance, the right type of technologies. So China is now using this window opportunity to present a governance agenda that is aligned with the incentives of China, particularly along the Belt and Road program. And also they are really targeting towards the priorities the world are really facing. WTO is now hosting more than 160 countries, but what have they been doing? Yes, they have been paralyzed by the United States, but the world is really shared by over 200 countries. So can the rest of the countries do something to really revitalize its functionality? So the initiative is also there to consolidate China's prior offering, like the Development Initiative, Security Initiative, Civilization Initiative, into a whole package of governance to signal the continuity and also the urgency for the global collaboration that is really there based on respect, based on sympathy, and also based on the future orientation.
Mr. Frimpong, Professor Liu has just highlighted how multilateral institutions are insufficiently representative and losing voice in the global order. Now, from your perspective, what role do multilateral institutions, especially the United Nations, play in addressing these global challenges, and are they fit for the purpose? What are your thoughts?
To some extent, yes. Obviously, I agree in the wisdom and the principles behind the reason why the world needed these multilateral institutions in the first place. And I believe that those binding principles, the wisdom behind such institutions still holds. Only challenge is in the functioning of these institutions, especially when you look at countries in the global south, in this context, Africa, right? So, for example, the UN in particular is still an indispensable platform for dialogue, diplomacy, and coordinated action. Irrespective of the shortfalls that we've seen in their coordinated actions in some parts of the world. To some extent, they've been capable of delivering global public goods, maybe through WHO, UNDP, advancing the SDGs, on the environment. We have the UN environmental program in climate negotiations. These are all tangible results or outcomes, as you've seen from multilateral institutions, especially even from the UN angle. For Africa, the stakes are very high. We're talking about a continent home to 1.4, 1.5 billion people, 54 countries, fastest growing economy. Yet, when you look at the representation of the multilateral institutional level, it's very, very small. Look at the UN Security Council. We do not have even a single country from Africa. That tells you the shortfall in the structure of these multilateral institutions. And so again, as I reiterate, not in the purpose of this institution, but in the structure, because that determines how they execute their purpose or their mandate. Because if you are not on the table, then obviously maybe you are the meal. And that is not something that we can continue to allow to exist in the sense that we have it now. And so this is why, countries in Africa continue to put through certain consensus calling for at least 2 permanent or 5 non-permanent seats for Africa at the council level. And even when you talk about even the imbalances when it comes to global financing, right? This is also through multilateral system, i.e. even the special drawing rights from the IMF and all these World Bank and how the global financing is being channeled. You can see some level of imbalances are in there. So again, the World Bank, the IMF, and all of these, they serve a purpose. To some extent, they have to help countries to some extent, but there's still a huge gap in the modalities that they use and the grading and the level of grading that they give to countries. And that creates a level of imbalances when it comes to their delivery. And so that is the challenge that we have with even multilateral financial institutions. So for me, that is what I see. that these multilateral institutions, yes, they are fit in terms of the core mandate, the core reasoning behind, but require some level of reforms to ensure that there's the balance in terms of representation.
Mr. Frimpong, you've also just mentioned there that representation is small, and you've highlighted the shortfalls of the multilateral institutions. Specifically for Africa, what message do you think China is sending through the GGI, and how does Africa fit into this vision of global governance?
Yeah, sure. I mean, China is signaling that Africa is a partner, not a passive recipient, in shaping global governance. The GGI echoes commitment under the FOCAC and the Belt and Road Initiative, also stressing to the point of Africa's own development agenda, which is Agenda 2063, and re-echoing it even under the SDG component. So it just shows that the GGI is just amplifying the fact that Africa is not a peripheral player, but a partner in shaping the global governance. And at the heart of GGI is a common governance for development for Africa. It means that issues such as development, financing, technology, climate are not side conversation, but central pillars of the global agenda. And so the initiative aligns with Africa's Agenda 2063 into every extent of what we are trying to do: debt financing, climate action, technology and governance, peace and security. So when you look at the broader vision under the GGI, obviously it fits into the reforms agenda of Africa when it comes to climate governance. So for policymakers in Africa, obviously this is an opportunity to push harder for more reforms, especially at the multilateral level, just the global governance architecture, climate justice, data inclusion, and the backing these priorities on global stage. So that is what I see the GGI presenting for Africa.
Now, just to take us back, we have Chinese initiatives like the Global Development Initiative, the Global Security Initiative, and the Global Civilization Initiative. How does GGI build upon these earlier Chinese initiatives?
Well, the Chinese initiative, particularly for the Belt and Road Initiative, was really to build a connectivity. And now China does not only see the prospects and also see the fruition of such a sort of initiative, but also we experience frustrations.
Okay.
What China is doing is not really to overturn the existing global order or existing global institutions, but a call for a practical, layered, and interoperable type of operation. So it is really a momentum that is there to push the global institutions to really work on a pragmatic basis. So we are there to not only propose the initiative, but rather I recently came off a discussion with some government leaders and also the Chinese state-owned companies. They also call for practical rulemaking process that is there to reflect the fairness and the equality, and also to ensure that all participants, all partners should really abide by certain type of rules. And very practically, so we need really to look at specific situations, specific appeals of different countries to formulate something that is more applicable instead of simply staying a slogan type of rhetoric. And then China is also doing by example. So we sent nearly 500,000 people to work on different construction sites on a global basis. And we are there to share our technology and send more of the environmentally friendly equipment to many parts of the world. And so we are also bearing a lot of brunts here in China in terms of environmental pressure. And we also offer so far the largest the scholarships for international students from all parts of the world, particularly from Africa. So the focus is really there, how we can really enhance people's cognitive capacity and give people the right type of skills to work on their own hands and also to cooperate to enlarge the benefit that all countries can really share on equal basis.
Just to wind up our discussion there, gentlemen, I would like to know, in your views, what kind of global order does the world most urgently need right now, and how can countries work together to achieve both common governance and common development? Maybe I'll start with you there, Mr. Frimpong.
The world urgently needs a development-centered global governance model, one that delivers tangible benefits, inclusivity, from all regions of the world, one that is structured, giving by casual look shows that indeed this is a true representation of the world, and that representation reflects from all regions of the world, even to the extent not just in terms of economic might, but also in size of population. That kind of world, that kind of global governance, that is what can really help. In fact, one that is tangible benefit, jobs, climate resilience, digital inclusion, especially for global south. So governance must be more inclusive. And countries achieve this by building bridges between north and south, reforming existing institutions and supporting initiatives like GGR that promotes common governance. So for us, from where we sit, I believe that is sort of a global governance model that the world needs at this point in the world that we find ourselves today.
Professor Liu, what are your thoughts? How can countries work together to achieve both common governance and common development?
Well, I think fundamentally we need to arrive on the consensus on some of the ethical issues. What is the right thing? What is the evil that we all have to confront? And based on which we need to follow those initiatives that are fair and equitable and also transparent. And then we also need to call for better responsibility of those leadership so that they need to look at what exactly what their people need rather than their political ambitions and also their political fantasies. And then we need to set up a number of rules to strengthen the operable part of the global institutions and also to make some arguments that are there to be more representative of the voices of the global south. And then there also needs to be a strong enforcement mechanism for those who are really there to default on contract, default on their commitments. There needs to be a certain level of punishment that is there to contain the deviation from such sort of rules. And then practically, let's start with some very realistic institutions like, how these participating countries can strengthen the governance and institutions like the new development bank, within the BRICS institution, and how the green transformation can be built in the operation of business communities to take care of more of the people's needs, of the environmental considerations instead of merely economic profit. So, all these are really calling for real deliverables and also make it more sustainable to follow. So this is something that the world really needs.
Right, on that note, we'll end our discussion. Gentlemen, it was a pleasure having you on the program.
Always a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Listeners, you can subscribe to our online newsletter on CGTN or Substack to get more insights on China-Africa relations. Just search China-Africa Talk. For now, it's goodbye. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please share it with others. Post it on social media or leave a rating and review. Thanks again. See you next time.